CJG Wellness Community, and where we help you live life to the full. We're here for another of our monthly chats, and I'm excited to tell you that we have Marjorie Grice from Nourish Inside Out, which is based in York, UK. It's an exciting, different type of therapy, but I'll let Marjorie explain all that. So hello, Marjorie, and thank you for coming today, and I'll hand over to you.
Hello. It's lovely to be here, and thanks for the invite to come on to your network and have a talk about my holistic nutrition that I offer. So as Carol said, I'm Marjorie, and I'm a menopause nutritionist that's based in York in the UK, but I work nationally. And my passion is to help ladies get their menopause mojo back. That's how I like to say it, because I feel that that time of life is a time when it's not just about the symptoms, which are obviously a huge factor, but it's about finding your life again and often finding your identity. So it's a bigger picture, isn't it?
That sounds really interesting. Yeah, thank you, Marjorie. I hadn't realised it was affected so many people. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and nutrition obviously has a huge part, and I'll be explaining a little bit more about what I exactly offer shortly. So yeah, it's more about the symptoms, more than the symptoms, isn't it? It's about finding our identity and making the most. So I'd like empowering women to make the most of themselves and their lives, especially at that time of life, because I think it's a challenging time. But obviously, everything that I'm going to share today is applicable to anyone. And we're covering the topic of stress, which obviously applies to all of us, and we need to all be looking at how we manage our stress. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into this and my background, and what nutritional therapy, or holistic nutrition as I like to call it, is and how it works. I'll talk a little bit about menopause and how to identify it, because as Carol and I have been chatting before, I think it's really important that, actually menopause does affect everybody. It doesn't just affect women, does it? It affects families and husbands and families as well. So it is important to have some understanding about it. And then I'm going to be talking all about stress and a little bit about the science. Again, the link to menopause, but also how it affects everyone. And then finishing off with some top tips at the end. So does that sound okay, Carol?
Yeah, no, the top tips I think would be really useful, because it's always good to have ideas to how to combat stress. So thank you. Yeah.
So I've always been fascinated by health and wellness all my life. And I started out in the beauty industry back in the 90s. And actually I worked at a health farm, because back then spas tended to be more health focused. I mean, I'm not saying they're not necessarily now, but it was much more health regimes and detoxes and things like that. And I progressed to management, and I did enjoy it. But then, as you're likely aware, spas sort of have moved away a lot from that. There are more companies getting into the wellness aspect of things, but they have moved away from that a lot. And I got more fascinated by the health. I mean, it was always the health that pulled me into that arena anyway. Although I did have an interest in skincare and stuff like that, I still do. So I progressed in my career, sort of specializing more with sports massage and skin treatments, and a little bit of holistic therapies. I did stone therapy and various things. I have spiritual awareness, so I do try and incorporate that in my work as well. But I like it when the science ties up with it all as well. I like to match the two together.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
And they do match up, don't they, quite often?
Yes. I'm finding more and more they match up. Yes, making sense.
Yeah. So part of my journey was that I did suffer with IBD, which is like an inflammatory bowel and autoimmune illness, when I was in my 30s, which went sort of undiagnosed for a long time. So I certainly got into looking at natural remedies, which I was already into, but it sort of increased that interest, and I explored it a lot more and did my own research, which back then was probably less available, and obviously we didn't have Instagram. So yeah, it was a bit different back then, but it certainly got me on that route of looking more at nutrition as a factor for helping health, and made me aware of sort of the naturopathic approaches that are available. So as my career progressed, I worked around my family really and moved around with my husband's job, and I set up various small businesses, some based at home around my family, which would work really well in Scotland, and then moved to York in 2005, where I set up a business, sort of not in the city centre, but in the suburbs of York really for a while. I did that, and also worked out of a hotel. So I've had quite a varied career sort of within that industry. I did sell products for a little bit, nutrition products, and did talks and things like that. And that also made me realise that I wanted to study again and learn more about nutrition. And so finally, just approaching my 50s, I retrained in nutritional therapy. So it's quite an arduous course. I did it in London at a reputable clinic. So I'm a registered nutritionist now, nutritional therapist with BANT, which means, you know, I have to do CPT and all the rest of it, and I'm properly regulated. And I think that can be an issue in nutrition, can't it? Some people find something works for them, but then actually, you know, it may not work for everybody, and it is quite a personalized thing.
Yes, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Yeah, you need to be clear what you're talking about. Yeah.
So a lot of people assume that I probably had a terrible menopause, but I think what made me focus on that was, I think I just got a passion that, again, like I said before, to help women live, you know, their best life, so to speak, and get their mojo back in general. But then when I was studying and trying to work as well through the menopause, it made me realize, when I learned the facts about it and exactly what was going on, I realized, you know, I didn't have that awareness, and so many people don't. We sort of I can look back and think, oh, that's why I was feeling more stressed at that time. You know, and I probably would have addressed it differently. I would have, for a start, I would have made myself relax a bit more because I think we would have appreciated that our body's having to go through a lot of things. So we need to give ourselves a bit more of a break around that time, and perhaps the family could have understood more as well, and then offer more support. So I think it's more that side of things. So it's not that I didn't have symptoms, but I didn't have like an early menopause or anything particularly dramatic. But I think it's more that aspect of things. So, will I talk a little bit more about how to identify menopause, Carol? Would that be useful?
Well, yeah, you could put a few facts in there. Yeah.
Facts,
as we said, it really affects everybody in one way or another. Be useful to know. Yeah, thank you.
So I do often direct people to look at the NICE guidelines if they're considering going to the doctor, because that gives you their language to speak if you want to get some support in that way. And obviously I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to be giving medical advice today, but that's a good starting point, because often they're very busy, that you don't get long. So if you put it in their language, it actually helps them think, oh yeah, it probably is menopause. You know, it helps with that process, doesn't it? Yes. And GPs also don't often test for it. So often going with a bit of more of an open mind can help as well. I think some women get a bit upset that they can't get a test to tell them. But there's good reason for that. And it's because the test they offer doesn't always show it up. So you might often get a negative when actually it could be positive. So false negative is what they call it. So yeah, there's a reason for that. The menopause, as I'm sure you know, is when menstruation ceases, but it's retrospective. So we don't always know the date precisely. And, you know, strictly speaking, we're called menopausal after we've been without our periods for a full year. And then you're entering post-menopause. And the average age in the UK is 51. And it does vary with different countries, which is interesting, isn't it? But you can start symptoms up to 8 years before that, obviously. So it can be quite a long time. And after, it can go on afterwards as well. Things like, well, I mentioned anxiety, didn't I? Mood changes, hot flushes, and night sweats, the ones that are often talked about. But actually, those aren't the main things that people come to me for help with. It's more the brain fog and the joint pain and, you know, stress, I think, as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and how it happens? Well, it's quite a demanding time for the body around that time. So we've got huge hormone shifts going on. And the whole, you know, menstruation cycle is quite a complex cycle anyway. When you look at all the hormones that are involved, it's not just estrogen and progesterone, there's other hormones involved, and they're going up and down at certain times of the month, and it's a complex process. So at menopause, when all of that's having to change quite dramatically, and actually estrogen comes right down, it plummets right down. So it is quite a change, and obviously naturally, but the body does do it naturally, very gradually. But my belief is that when our body isn't functioning optimally, we actually feel that more. So if we are more stressed, if our gut health isn't correct, if we're not looking after ourselves properly, then we are going to have more symptoms. And I think that could be true of any illness, couldn't it? Really?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I'm not saying menopause isn't an illness, but in even any natural process that our body has to go through, it's not going to cope as well, is it? If our body isn't in full health.
Mm.
It kind of makes logical sense. So, and the reason it happens is that as we get older, our egg producing follicles actually decline. So, and obviously when we're fertile, these mature, produce estrogen, and then that keeps the estrogen levels higher. But then as menopause kicks in and those follicles are declining, we're actually getting less and less estrogen produced in the body. So eventually it does cease. But during the time before that, which we tend to call perimenopause, there's a lot of erratic hormone levels, which can cause sort of erratic menstruation and other symptoms that are probably a little bit more dramatic sometimes, and the night sweats and so on that we mentioned. And then post-menopause, obviously, things are a lot more stable. So often symptoms tail off again, but some do continue to have some symptoms. So that's just a bit of an overview.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
All right. So now I'll go on to talk about what actually is a nutritional therapist, which is what my qualification is. I've actually come across the term, well, I've used the term holistic nutritionist today because I think this actually encompasses better what I do. Because when we talk about being a nutritionist, people assume that you're only addressing nutrition and it's only about nutrient deficiencies or lack, because not many of us are pure. Well, some of us can be deficient in certain things, but it's more that we don't have optimal amounts for lots of them, isn't it?
Yes.
Which we need. So yeah, it's not about that. Actually, what I do is a root cause approach. So it's a root cause medicine, really. We do look at the biochemical imbalances that are going on. And you can include, the mind and the spiritual aspect of that as well, which I think is really interesting. I'm getting much more interested in that aspect of things and how we can use the things we know about, like meditation and so on. I'll touch on that later. But yeah, it all impacts on that area, which I think is quite interesting. So yeah, it's not just about, looking at macronutrients and counting calories. It's certainly not about that. It's much more about being a bit of a detective and looking at the root cause of things. And often it is stress is a massive root cause.
Yes. Root cause so much. Yes.
We often say, you could eat the perfect diet, but if you don't address stress, actually, you probably won't make much progress because it's so fundamental to the thing, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The stress is mammoth.
Yeah. So it's a systems approach, and we have obviously hormones and the immune system and the digestive system and the brain are all connected. Often by the hormones and the gut and so on, but they're all connected. So one will affect the other. So the beauty of the root cause approach is that once we address a root cause, we often find lots of symptoms do get helped. We're not just looking at the symptom, but we're supporting the imbalance, and then we're balancing out the body. But it's not a quick fix, and it can take time. And that's where I offer coaching that helps people to put these changes in place, which I think is quite powerful, to help people actually make the changes. And I think that's also where we can touch on spiritual things and what's gone on in our life before, what might be holding us back. And a lot of those tools can really help us move forward with our life in general, but also with our eating habits and improving our own health.
Yes. Yeah. No, improving getting to the fundamentals is so important to affect everything. Yeah.
There's something else I've come across is, I like, a lot of people think they're genetics. I kind of stuck with their genetics and, they think, oh, well, my parents were diabetic, I'll be diabetic. Yeah. But it doesn't actually mean that, because we can actually change our epigenetics, change our outcomes by our diet and lifestyle. And it is scientifically evidenced.
Yes.
Epigenetics. So it's not our core DNA, obviously, but our epigenetics can be changed.
Yes.
Really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that is something that people really aren't aware of so much. So that would be good to talk about that too. Yeah.
So now I'm going to just move on to stress and, what a vicious circle that can cause, especially for women at menopause. and at any time, in fact, for anyone. When we're juggling different responsibilities, I think women are kind of guilty of taking on a lot and trying to please people and having lots of roles, because we just seem to have that nurturing and that I'm generalizing, obviously, but yeah, that we tend to take it on, don't we? We do a lot of the roles with family and cooking and house and all the different things. So, and at menopause, often it's older relatives as well, isn't it? Or teenagers, universities. There are lots of stuff going on, so it does impact. And I'm sure you'll be able to apply that to your own life. If there's just busyness of modern life is a massive thing, isn't it?
Yes, and what you expect of yourself as well. Sometimes you have to really look at it and think, well, no, I don't need to be like that, do I?
You do take a step back, and I think that's what I noticed from my own self. I realised I actually thrived on that busyness and activity, and almost thrived on stress. It can be a bit of an addiction, can't it? And we have to go back to that. So yeah, I can digress. I'll try and keep on topic. So to bring menopause into that, which after this I'll probably be taught more generally, but I said it can be exacerbated by stress, just because the increased hormones that have been released as stress hormones will have an impact on our sex hormones. They're very closely related. The adrenal gland actually produces all of them. So it's going to have a lot of work to do. And actually what happens is the body will prioritize the stress response over menopause, over fertility, over lots of other functions, because it thinks you're running away from a problem or a danger. So that's important for survival. So it puts that in the priority. So you'll be lacking the nutrients and the building blocks for the sex hormones, which is obviously going to have a knock-on effect on the body. So I'm sure you've all heard of fight and flight response, which is what kicks in if we're in immediate danger. So in modern life, it's not usually running away from a wild animal, but it might be like you've got a deadline for work, or you're in a traffic jam, running for the bus, which you're late for, things like that. So they're over quite quickly, and then you sort of just relax, and you can almost feel more relaxed afterwards, can't you? Because all the stress hormones disappear. And the problem happens when it's sustained for longer. So this sort of short-term response is a sympathetic nervous system, or a fight and flight is a bit like the accelerator on a car. So it's giving you that extra energy, and all the blood is getting diverted to your eyes, your muscles, your heart will beat faster. But things like digestion will slow down. And like I said, we're not going to be particularly fertile either. We're not going to be in the mood. No. Yeah. We're going to be running away. But yeah, the problem arises if the body overreacts with modern stressors, obviously, because they often are sustained and we're not physically active either. And the physical activity can actually help to get rid of some of those stress hormones, which I'm so sure those of us that exercise appreciate. So yeah, it's when it carries on for a long time that's the problem. And it's what we call the hypothalamus pituitary axis, the HPA, keeps being activated. And then we get chronic levels of cortisol being secreted into the body. And that will cause problems like raised blood sugar and potentially diabetes and heart disease. And you can see why, because obviously this blood is getting pumped around constantly. But also it's because the cortisol becomes sort of dysfunctional. It's designed to sustain the stress response, but when that goes on for a long time, it just becomes a bit dysfunctional, and it influences the immune system as well, which can make us more prone to infections and disease, potentially even autoimmune, and just makes us less resilient to disease. And stress as well, actually, because that can actually affect us long term. We have some sort of traumas going on, and it can actually make us prone, we're less resilient to just stressful situations as time goes on. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
So I touched a bit about how stress affects us. It affects us both mentally and physically, doesn't it, if you think about it? So physically, I mentioned digestion, because the blood's diverted away from the stomach and the gut. We're not going to be digesting our food properly. Our stomach acid stops, and that's quite key for digesting protein. And that can obviously lead to problems with the gut and having dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the gut bacteria. And it means we won't be absorbing all the nutrients we need. And from a hormonal point of view, we won't be able to get rid of used hormones, and that has a knock-on effect on the liver as well. And also, you know, microbes that shouldn't be there and toxins, all of that can build up and lead to an unhealthy gut, poor digestion, even weight gain. And, you know, IBS is so common, isn't it, these days?
Yes, yeah, very common. Yeah.
Facts, everything. And then some of the other physical things I talked about, obviously increased heart and cardiovascular, muscle tension. That's a result of being chronic stress often. And then we can get disturbed sleep, can't we, quite easily when we're stressed, because our cortisol levels are raised, and cortisol is the complete opposite of melatonin that we need to sleep. So they're on opposite ends. So if cortisol's high, then melatonin won't be high. So yeah, and that can, you know, that can be, if we're up late at night wondering why we can't sleep, that's probably why we can't get sleep. But we can have a lot of tactics to kind of help with that and support that. And then obviously our mind, and that actually is also connected with the gut, because the gut talks to the brain and vice versa. There's a bidirectional communication between the brain and the gut. So that can make us influence our mood, make us anxious, cause racing thoughts, and so on. And it's mainly because we have got a nerve that connects the brain and the gut, the vagus nerve, which I'm sure many of you have probably heard of. And it's important. We can actually exercise that. We're talking a little bit about that later. But yeah, it has lots of nerve endings in the gut. So if the gut has lots of immune receptors, as I've said before, and immune chemicals, really, cytokines and different things that will communicate to the brain. So, you know, there's this two-way communication. It really is through the immune system in many ways. And a lot of things do actually get through the blood-brain barrier, and they can affect the brain. And actually, they think now a lot of things can be caused by brain inflammation to do with the immune system, which they originally thought couldn't actually affect the brain. So that's another diversion that we could do another day.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, I didn't realise that.
Got brain access. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the psychological stages, but even just the immediate effects of stress, obviously the blood is not going to the brain because we're running away from danger. Then just that can cause brain fog in itself. We haven't got the brain, and the brain needs a lot of energy actually to work. So if we're stressed long term, that's bound to have a massive effect on our own well-being and our ability to function in life and to make decisions and so on. And that's quite key in menopause as well, because estrogen has a lot of people think estrogen is just, you know, ovaries, but actually they affect the brain quite a lot as well, the estrogen hormones.
Oh, that is interesting, yes. How it all works together. Yeah. So
what can we do then? So first of all, I thought I'd just talk about rewiring our brain, which I really like. You know, when I do nutritional therapy, I do talk a lot about lifestyle techniques as well. So it's not purely nutrition, because like I said, addressing stress, and it's not just only about the food, although that's a big part of it. So obviously stress involves a lot of our thoughts and emotions. And we can, you know, learn to renew our minds, which I think is really important. But having said that, I think that can really touch on the spiritual aspect of things. And I think we have to allow that prompting, because otherwise I think we're just working hard at trying to renew our minds, and it's kind of counterproductive. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah.
Coming
from.
I think it helps to have that spiritual insight as to know how to do that.
Absolutely.
It's not to say we can't try and practice a few positive things. So changing our negative self-talk is obviously going to help, and then being trying to be more optimistic about things and being full of gratitude really does make a difference.
Yes, the self-talk is a biggie, isn't it? Yeah. Really, to change that, the way you consider yourself and think about yourself. Yeah, absolutely.
About ourselves in particular, absolutely. And also we can set ourselves up for a bit of failure sometimes by perceiving things to be negative. So I suppose even doing talks, I've had to reframe that myself because I find it quite nerve-wracking. So, but it's amazing how powerful our mind is. So if we start to reframe it a bit and, take the pressure off ourselves in a way, then that can really help. So reframing certain things. So I think a Monday morning is a good one, isn't it? Like, oh, Monday morning. But if we frame that in our head, it can be quite. So another thing, obviously, is deep breathing and mindfulness. Exercise really helps, even if it's just 10 minutes out in the fresh air. Meditation, I think I mentioned that, and even singing can help relax. And all of those things actually train the vagus nerve that I mentioned. So we talk about vagal tone a lot, and you can look it up. It's really interesting. So it's this nerve. It's one of the biggest nerves in the body. And it's responsible for getting us into rest and digest, which is the complete opposite of fight and flight response. And it's often what I talk about to my clients, that we really need to get you resting and digesting, because it's just better. Our body is in a mode that we can build and repair when it's like that. Whereas when it's always in fight and flight, it can't do that. It's just surviving, and it can't repair or mend and get better. So yeah, those are some things that will help with retraining the vagus nerve. There's also cold showers, but that's not always very popular.
No, I have tried it though.
Yeah. So, now on to the nutrients that I was going to talk about. So key vitamins to support stress. Now I would say B vitamins are one of the main ones, and I don't recommend supplements across the board, and I'm sure you don't either, Carol. It's much more personal. So I'm focused on food really initially, and then if you've done testing, or if you really think that there's one nutrient that's going to be more beneficial, that's when for an individual, that's when I would focus on a supplement. So for brain chemicals and for energy production, definitely B vitamins that you can get in your leafy greens, nuts and seeds, meat, fish and dairy, and bananas. But a stressful time, B vitamins are quite crucial at menopause and for stress.
Yeah.
And then alongside that, we've got vitamin C, which is important for your adrenal glands and responsible for production of the hormones. So again, you've got vegetables, but more tomatoes, peppers, again, leafy greens and broccoli. Now, one of my favorite minerals is actually magnesium.
Yes, that's very popular, that one, yeah.
I like it because, well, it's just got so many things. It's good. It gets depleted with stress. And for women, quite often they're depleted in magnesium throughout their lives for whatever reason. I think it's just dietary. We don't eat a lot of refined foods. It's in lots of foods actually, but we tend to be depleted. And it's good for stress. It's like the relaxing mineral. Help with the brain balance, and help with the neurotransmitters in the brain and help us to relax more. So the main source of magnesium would be nuts and seeds, and things like that.
Yes, yeah.
So, and the other thing I tend to often talk about is obviously having good sources of protein to build the hormone, that you need to build hormones in the first place and build our body. And that also helps to stabilize our blood sugar levels and keep our metabolism running smoothly. So quite often I'm telling people to make sure they have some protein at breakfast, especially for menopausal ladies, because blood sugar gets affected through our hormones, believe it or not. Can actually makes us more vulnerable. The lack of estrogen, so all these things are more sensitive. Our gut's more sensitive. Our blood sugar is more sensitive. So if you eat eggs at breakfast, or including lots of nuts and seeds and things like that. But obviously at every meal, ideally. But our vegetarian sources are available, aren't they?
Yes, yeah.
Beans and tofu. Tofu is great menopausal time because it's also a phytoestrogen.
Right. Oh, that's good, yeah.
So phytoestrogens have, sometimes they get a bit of a bad rap, but they are quite well researched. There's a few of them. They're natural, mainly plant products in a sense. They're in plant foods, and they can mimic estrogen, but not in a dangerous way. So they're helping to modulate it. So they attach to the receptors that estrogen would attach to. So if you've got excess estrogen, they will help to dampen it. And if you've got less, they will sort of adapt to the process. But they're in lots of plant foods, lentils and beans, even in carrots, I believe. And then obviously soya is the top one, really. Tofu and soya bean, things like that. So that's a good one for a menopause thing.
Oh.
Touched on blood sugar, and I think it's so key because stress will actually mess up our blood sugar because the cortisol that gets secreted actually increases, you know, because the body wants to run away. It says, oh, you need more insulin, you need more sugar in your bloodstream. So, you know, it affects all of that process. So keeping having complex carbohydrates in your diet, and by that I mean unrefined foods, really, natural as you can get them. The brown versions.
Yes.
The brown versions. But then what people often forget is it doesn't have to be grains. We can eat starchy carbohydrates in the form of vegetables that are quite nice. Not so much your white potatoes, but things like sweet potato, squash, even carrots, parsnips, celeriac, things like that can really help to give you the carbohydrates without having to have grains, which can be inflammatory at times, having too many grains.
Mm.
So does that help? Is that...
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. Amazing.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
It's good. So yeah, I could go on and on, to be honest. But you can have too much information, can't you? To work. Yeah. And that's kind of how I work with my clients, actually. We don't overload you with loads of stuff to do. I do work mainly one-to-one with nutritional therapy consultations that are done in packages, but I have a few one-off ways of working with people as well to give them an introduction. So the one I was going to talk about today is my menopause review that I do. But actually, I could do that around any health concern. So not necessarily have to be around menopause. But what we do is it's personalized. So there is a short form to fill in, but it's a tailored look at your health. And we can address one topic. So perhaps it was sleep or gut health, or could be a menopausal symptom. And it gives you a sort of introduction to nutritional therapy to see if it's something that you're interested in. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could do it for men on gut health, as you're saying.
Yeah.
Or any other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would you do things like that for back problems and things like that as well?
Yeah, I do have people coming for that, for muscular stuff like that. Yeah, we do get things like that.
Because that's a big problem, isn't it, as well? A lot of back problems. Yeah, muscle problems.
People fill the form in, other things come to light, you know. We go quite back into the history as well. It's amazing what can show up.
Yes, yeah. Oh, that sounds really good. Yes, thank you. So people would come to you and you would do one of those, get them to fill in a form about the issue.
And also I'm happy to do a discovery call, which is completely free, to have a chat first if people want to have a chat. So that's a free thing. And I would do an offer for £99 for the review.
All right, I see. That's really good.
Free discovery call, which is all on my website. You can send a little email, book that. And it's always quite good to have a chat first anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. No, that'd be really good. Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a lot of information and a lot of useful tips and hints about what to do. So, especially with the food, because it's always good to know which foods are best to eat. Leafy greens always seem to come up top, whatever you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yes. Anyway, thank you very much, Marjorie. And we hope to speak to you soon again. So,
thank you. Bye now.
Bye. Yes, so thank you, everybody. So this is Carol signing off from the CJG Wellness team. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye for now. Live life to the full.